Mark Carney, seemingly on a whim, decided to recognize Palestine as a state with conditions, but the conditions were, do you commit to trying to fulfill these conditions? And that was it. And that came out of nowhere for a lot of Canadians. It seemed to come out of nowhere even for the legacy media.
I'm just going to say it outright. This is stupid, and more than it's stupid, it's dangerous.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are absolutely thrilled to be bringing you this interview. This is an interview that we've wanted to have for over a year, but due to scheduling, due to this little thing called an election, there's so many things that actually got in the way of this. But this person is an MP, a leader that all of NP Nation has been wanting to see on the show. She's a straight shooter, she's a firecracker, and she always tells it like it is. Ladies and gentlemen, Melissa Lantsman, welcome to Northern Perspective.
I am so happy to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller. And I'm excited to have a chat and have your audience get something from this.
Excellent. Well, thanks for hosting us in your office in Thornhill.
You're welcome anytime. For those of you who are interested, the housing prices are very high here, but there's still room to grow in Thornhill, and we're accepting new members.
Well, as you've said, in many instances, this is a phenomenal community and very supportive. And it was I felt safe actually coming in here, which is good. So
that's good. It's a really, really special place, and it's super special to represent like the place where you grew up. And this community, it was there long before I was born, but it grew in the time that sort of I came of age. So my folks are amongst the first to buy an affordable home in this area, and I grew up here. And now to be able to go to all of the hot spots that I visited when I was a teenager, albeit maybe not doing all of the same things. I'm probably a lot better behaved now when I go to these places. It is a really, really phenomenal experience. I'm really humbled by it every time I walk around here.
So you've worked around the political sphere for a long time. I read up you speak 3 languages. Is that correct?
I do. 3.5. Depends who you ask.
So you speak English, you speak French, you speak Russian.
I do. My parents were from Ukraine, and they were Russian speakers from there. And my grandparents spoke Russian to me, and my dad, up until the time where he passed away, spoke Russian to me, and I answered in English. So lost a little bit of that, and I speak a functional Hebrew.
Wow. Well, I will say spasiba for joining us on Northern Perspective.
Mr. Rabbit.
That's thank you in Russian, everybody. And I've exhausted my Russian right there. So let's just talk about how, growing up in this community, how did you end up getting involved in politics and then specializing in communication? It's super interesting. I'll tell you this because there's a lot of people in this community that would feel the same way. So my parents are immigrants from the former Soviet Union. They came here in the mid 70s, so it would have been 50 years last year that they would have been here. They've both since passed away. So I talk about them a lot because they're a big part of what shaped my worldview, as most families would be. And my dad came here as an uncredentialed engineer, and my mom actually went to school here, and they bought a home here in a safe neighborhood, raised kids. And not in a million years would they think that moving to a new country without the language, that their kid could be like in the hallways of power in Ottawa. It was just like a non-starter for them. So they weren't super supportive of my bizarro interest in politics and public policy, because they just thought it was a dead end for an immigrant kid. Or a kid of immigrants. But they taught me how to work hard and do the right thing even when it was hard. They made sure that I went through school and got good grades and that I could really do whatever I want. That's why they moved here, for better opportunities. So to have grown up and be shaped by this community and then represent it, I told you, was like one of the coolest things ever. Is that where you grew and developed that strength? Because, you may not be the tallest MP in the House, but I think a lot of people really respect you in the House, and I think a lot of Canadians and other MPs would regard you as one of the strongest MPs in the House.
I appreciate that, and we're sitting right now, but I'm actually amongst the shortest of MPs. I came from a household where my mother, who worked she went to school here and she worked a white collar job, and my dad was uncredentialed and he worked in the taxi business and in small businesses. So they were sort of treated very differently, although their level of education and intelligence wasn't any different. And I grew up with this like a strong female, authority figure in the house, a breadwinner, and somebody who didn't see. And I had a dad that was really supportive, that, girls could do whatever they want. There was no limitations on it. So I think that's a big part of it. I talk about them a lot, because I just don't think you are the person that you are without them. And for me personally, they were such an integral part of the way that I grew up, what they talked to me about, what the issues of the day, the very fact that they would encourage me to explore the things that I like to do, and they just sort of put no parameters around it.
Well, it definitely comes through when you speak, and it definitely comes through, whether you're on an interview or whether you're talking to you at a campaign event. Just for everybody listening, I've had the pleasure of door knocking with Melissa, I think twice now, at one of Connie Cody's events and one of Ned Keurik's events. And there's actually, I think that's one of the biggest similarities between you and Pierre is how you're on camera in these settings is very similar to how you're off camera. And it's that authenticity that I think has drawn a lot of new supporters to the Conservatives, because that's what's been missing in politics, I think, especially in the Liberal Party for the last 10 to 15 years. So, is that by accident, or is that just...
No, look, I think being compared to Pierre and then some of the Conservative politicians that came before us to pave the way, I think it's an incredible honor. And one of the things that I find super inspiring and interesting about Pierre specifically is the fact that he's been able to grow this coalition of people who were not particularly conservative, not particularly interested, not in the bucket of what our traditional support looks like. And I think a lot of that has been drawn out of people because of the authentic factor. He says things that the way that they are, they're super thought out. And I don't think that he, I don't think you can accuse him of ever, dropping a policy that hasn't been thought out meticulously and even discussed internally with those around him and those in our caucus. But I think that's the new way of doing politics. I think the stuffy suit talking points, even though I'm kind of wearing a suit right now, the talking points nature of politics is gone. I think the most successful people are those that were brought up by the community that elects them to go and represent the community. And that's, if you're putting me in the bucket with Pierre, I'm super honored, but I learned from a lot of people before me, that this is a business about relationship. It's a business at the end of the day, to provide services and help to people. And it's a whole lot more about listening than it is talking.
Well, I'm glad you brought up discussing policy and, vetting it properly, because that's a perfect segue into something that happened recently where Mark Carney, seemingly on a whim, decided to recognize Palestine as a state with conditions, but the conditions were, do you commit to trying to fulfill these conditions? And that was it. And that came out of nowhere for a lot of Canadians. It seemed to come out of nowhere even for the legacy media. So what is, your reaction to that this wasn't discussed in the House, wasn't debated, and even people, I think, that are on the left that voted for Mark Carney are asking the question, well, wait a minute, I didn't vote for this. So how can you say that Canada is recognizing this when this doesn't even feel like a decision that came from Canada, never mind Parliament? Yeah,
look, I couldn't explain to you how frustrating it is to be a parliamentarian, to not be part of the discussions of policy decisions going forward in a country. This is just the last one. I'm just going to say it outright. This is stupid, and more than it's stupid, it's dangerous. And it rewards the very terror that this country purportedly stands against. And it makes the situation very dangerous and very divided on our streets. And we've seen tons of that over the course of the last 23 months, particularly in this country. Look, when you put conditions on something, they obviously should be preconditions. Like, you have to remember that the recognition of the Palestinian state with the government that's now in place should have us, from a policy perspective, listing them as a state sponsor of terror the very next day, because that's exactly what they are. So if you're looking at the leadership in a Palestinian state, and believe me, I want a free Palestine too. I want it free from Hamas and free from the terror, and free from the hell that they subjugate their own people to, including 7 Canadians that they killed on October 7th and after October 7th, and the 50 that remain in the tunnels 645 or 46 days later. And a generation of young Palestinians who could very well live in a very different state right now. The reward for terror of a man who is in the 20th year of his 4-year mandate, who has set up a martyrs fund to reward those who carry out terrorist attacks against innocent civilians, men, women, and children. A regime that is ingrained in government, the Hamas, who kills babies and throws, subjugates women and throws people off of roofs. And I just don't understand how a country rooted in freedom and democracy and the rule of law and everything that is supposed to be the antithesis of life right now in the Palestinian Authority, how we could possibly recognize that without, first of all, conversation, but how we can never recognize that to begin with. It makes no sense to me. Well,
especially since shortly after he did that, there was a gentleman, and I won't dignify him by saying his name, was on Al Jazeera, and he said basically that the fact that Carney did that justifies October 7th. And he said that there will be 1 million more October 7th. And
it's a reward, right?
Right. And it's not like anyone that actually understands terrorism didn't see that coming. Like, the minute that you reward it justifies to them why they did it in the first place. And it gives them every inclination to do it again. And this is why many countries, apparently not us, have the policy of you do not ever negotiate with terrorists.
Correct. Yeah, well, look, it's very clear that that this sort of the movement of just a weird woke politics, I don't know how else to say it, has co-opted some of the brightest minds in the West. There is a reason that there is no recognition of statehood from the actors in the region. There is a very big reason for that, and rewarding terror, I think, is chief among them. You cannot go to a music festival and kill teenagers and then get statehood after it. That's the simple conversation. I actually brought this up in a speech I made in the House of a motion that they had brought forward. I think it was last November, knowing that this was probably where this was going to go, unilateral recognition. Conservatives, I should say, believe in the eventuality of some version of 2 states living side by side in peace and security, but that negotiation has to happen between Israel and whatever government in the Palestinian Authority, free of terrorism and free Hamas, exists. Today, that's not the case, and it certainly isn't by unilateral recognition from Canada.
Well, and evidently it's a signal from Mark Carney that he believes that he can make these decisions unilaterally and that he doesn't need to have these discussions. And I think we've seen that.
It's kind of a vibe that we've got. Kind of a vibe.
He's in a vibe session.
Yeah, so. It's a whole vibe session of just the complete abdication of Parliament and their responsibility, and the responsibility of parliamentarians to have a discussion to get us to the best place.
And we see that almost on display as he was, lying to Canadians throughout the election. He specifically said and was asked, this was the surprising thing, or maybe not surprising, do you have any stocks in Stripe? Do you have any stocks in Brookfield? And he said, I own nothing but
real estate and cash.
Right.
That's what he said.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have him on camera. We've played that clip many times.
Yeah.
And then we got to learn that he has stock options, which is almost worse than having stock in Brookfield. Right. Because he can say, well, I don't own any stock in Brookfield, but you have stock options. And we've explained to our audience what that means. But essentially, the long and short of it is he was granted these shares at a fixed low price. And the better Brookfield does, he gets to decide when to cash out
That's right.
and completely turn that around. So even though that those shares aren't technically on his conflict of interest, those stock options are. So the question for Canadians is, how can you have the most conflicted prime minister in the history of this nation be involved in making any decision, or have his government be involved in making any decision without Canadians questioning, well, how does this not benefit Mark Carney, and how was he not in a conflict of interest?
Well, I mean, the short answer is that you can't.
Right.
Like you have one of two options. Either he's making decisions knowing full well that those decisions might benefit him or do benefit him, whether it's the mentioning of a nuclear company that Brookfield has involvement in.
That would be Westinghouse.
That would be Westinghouse, or modular home construction in the midst of a housing crisis. So you either have him making decisions that will benefit him financially, or you have him sitting out of decisions entirely, which again is not good for a prime minister. And not viable for the future. Look, there's only one way to do this. And this notion of like blind trust, and the fact that you put it in a blind trust after you know exactly what's being put in there, and you're still making decisions as a prime minister based on what you knew. Like, it's not like you have one of those, remember those Men in Black, like the the memory stick that just erases your memory. Like, it doesn't work like that. And it's like silly to suggest, and it treats people as if they're stupid. So, look, I don't think this is good for the prime minister, because every time he makes a decision, and every time the government works with some company to put to move public policy forward, if that's in fact what the Liberals intend to do, or if they've somehow found their mojo to do it, which I highly doubt, then you have Canadians questioning every step of the way whether that benefits Carney. That's not good for Canada either. Like, there's only one way to deal with this, and it's sell everything, put it in have a trustee, take care of it so you can confidently make decisions. Until that happens, I think there is a whole lot of fodder for Conservatives, and I know that we have a strong team, guys like Michael Barrett and others on the Ethics Committee that are going to be able to prosecute this in terms of having the most conflicted prime minister in the history of this country.
And do you think that the long-term solution should be a policy that any sitting prime minister should have no investments whatsoever? They should be forced to sell everything off, stick them in a GIC. That way, there's
well, you don't even necessarily have to do that, but you can appoint a trustee to sell everything off.
It's like a double blind trust.
Exactly. Right. Like the blind trust, the thing that he's trying to sell to Canadians on having a blind trust, like, is just complete nonsense. And if you thought for 1 second about it, you're like, okay, well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But yeah, there are ways to inoculate yourself from obviously benefiting from government decisions, or even the perception that you could benefit from government decisions. Like, it's not that complicated. And this is a big job, and it's an important job. And it's one that I think that should be handled with a whole lot more care.
Now, one of the things that has come up recently, especially in the by-election for Pierre, well, it's not really recent, it's been going on since 2019, is this mockery of our elections by this group called the Longest Ballot Committee. Yes. We've done a lot of investigation on them, and we've called out some very suspicious activity that we would like to see Elections Canada investigate. We would like to see the RCMP investigate. But there are ways to prevent this from happening again. And our main concern here is that the way they're executing this prank is negatively impacting the Charter 3 rights of Canadians across the country that may have disabilities, they may have dyslexia, they may be seniors.
Right.
And it's preventing them from actually voting. And we've spoken to scrutineers that have worked past elections who have recounted occasions where Canadians became so frustrated at the polls because they couldn't figure out this ballot. And it sounds truly to some people, but if you have a disability, nothing is trivial. So what does it say that the Liberals haven't really come out and spoken against this, considering the fact that you would expect that a party on the left would be all over an issue that has to deal with impacting people with disabilities?
Well, first off, I never really thought about it in that way. And so you've given me some food for thought in terms of how others would see this. I see this as entirely a mockery of the system and interfering in the election process. Is a weaponization of the ballot. These are not real candidates. They're not having real election campaigns. They're they don't deal with real constituents. Like the whole thing is again is a mockery. And I think the reason the Liberals are not dealing with it, because despite what you say, this is very partisan. And despite what the longest ballot committee says, like, they are a partisan group attacking conservatives. And so, I mean, to them, I say, like, good afternoon to everybody except for them. And their trick didn't work this time. But it is there are very simple solutions to fix this. We're going to encourage the government, obviously, to take this issue. We're happy to see Elections Canada do something in order to get around these jokers, because that's exactly what they are. And we'll push the government to sort of close that loophole. Like, you can't make a joke out of this. If governing is not a joke, picking your elected representative is not a joke. And I think the longer we have this, the less, first of all, the less integrity in the system, but the less confidence that Canadians have that we can do anything right, including elections.
Well, and we've tried to do our part. We raised a petition sponsored by Ned Curick. We've received over 31,000 signatures for that. So, and in that, we're recommending specific changes to the Elections Act that would
for sure
help deal with this. So.
One CFO, things like that, right?
Yep.
Like it's a CFO is basically the finance person in a campaign, and the only one that can go to jail on a campaign. If you didn't know that, but having one financial representative would fix some of that. And
we're also suggesting that candidates must pay up to a $2,000 fine if they don't run in good faith, and they have to demonstrate that they're actually running in good faith. And that way, it's not going to be a charter violation to charge that, because the whole point of an election is you're trying to get elected.
That's right.
And the longest ballot committee may jump up and down and complain all they want, but the way to affect change within our legislation is talking to your MP, raising petitions, raising support. You don't, as we've talked about this analogy, you don't fight forest fires by trying to protest and shut down the fire department. And that's exactly what they're doing. So if they're really serious about saying, well, the Liberals didn't implement reform on our elections to eliminate first past the post in 2015, you should be out protesting every single Liberal constituency office across the country.
Doesn't work like that with them.
No, because that's difficult.
That's right. That's right.
But we look forward to seeing where this goes in the fall. And but one thing
I was happy to see that lots of those candidates didn't even get one vote, because I suspect they weren't serious enough to even vote for themselves. So.
Well, because all of them that live in the riding and can't vote for themselves. But and that brings us to the fall. So we made it through the 2025 election, not where we want, but we are now gearing up for, thanks to Mr. Mark Carney and all of his gaffes and non-action, it should be a very electric fall, I think, because you have a Conservative Party that seems to be approaching the fall kind of different this time around, in that there's a lot to hold the government to account and oppose, but it also sounds like the Conservative Party is almost reflecting the frustration of Canadians, saying, if you're not going to do it, then we're going to do it ourselves by proposing legislation that's intended to actually get this country back on track.
Yeah, look, it is, first of all, going back as conservatives with more caucus members, with new caucus members, with a renewed energy of, particularly in my neck of the woods, I got a whole lot of friends that I didn't have before on our side of the aisle, with an expanded coalition of, unions and tradespeople and young people and new Canadians and people who've never voted before. So making sure that we're speaking to the the 8 million people that entrusted us with their vote, entrusted Pierre with their vote. The 41% that he did get, and then figuring out how to grow that coalition, standing up for the issues, the stuff that didn't change. Like, there's nothing that changed for the better since April 28th. We still have a housing crisis. We have an immigration crisis. We have a crime, drugs, chaos, disorder in our streets. You don't have to look very far in any direction to see that things aren't better. A youth unemployment crisis. It costs 50% of your income to afford a place to live. Food costs have gone up 30% in the last 5 years. These are indisputable facts. So we're obviously going to fight for all of those people who entrusted us with the vote and make sure that we point out that the biggest crisis of our time, the one that, Mark Carney told everybody that he was elbows up for, we're actually worse off than we were before he started. We've got 75%, canola tariffs. That's on top of the tariffs that exists on peas and pork and seed. That's on top of the 100% tariffs that agree. We've got ministers going to Mexico to try to strike up bilateral trade agreements that are getting snubbed. We've got a prime minister that's not being invited to the world's biggest meetings. And so this elbows up nonsense, needs to be called out. And I think more and more Canadians are going to see what's actually happening. That's what we're going to go back and fight and propose real solutions to get us, to get our economy back on track, to make us more resilient, to kill some of the anti-energy laws that exist, the industrial carbon tax, the crazy EV mandate. I can go on, and there's no shortage of things to fight for in Parliament, and I'm excited to do that, particularly with Pierre back in the House.
And lastly, there's a lot of Canadians around this country that they want to be able to do something. They want to be able to feel like they're helping. And they want to work towards a hopeful future instead of sitting around and waiting for a government that's potentially not going to deliver that future for them. What can they do? How can they get involved? And how can Canadians give themselves a sense of purpose in this fight?
So look, I think this country has so much potential, and that we are squandering day by day. And I know that this country is full of hardworking people that want to do right by the next generation. It's things like, share this stuff, talk to your neighbors, reach out to the MP, come help. The day that the last campaign ends is the day that the next campaign starts. You've walked through this office and you've seen a whole bunch of people. They don't all work here, but lots of them are still engaged and volunteering, and making sure that we get it right next time, that we get it right for not only the 8 million people that voted for us, but the million more that are going to look for another option that is ready to govern this country and fix it.
Melissa Lantsman, thanks for all you do, and thanks for joining us on Northern Perspective.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Share this.